Welcome to another edition of Category Creation Labs. This week, Jason and Mike answer the number one question we get asked by founders and entrepreneurs. Why doesn't anyone see what my company could become except for me? Keep listening for insights and examples of companies who faced this question and answered it with a different point of view. And now, without further ado, here is Category Creation Labs.
Day after the election, don't want to talk politics, but I think that all of the uncertainty, there's now certainty, right? So it starts to make things move in markets a little bit more. And we're kind of seeing that.
I know we heard that from a bunch of people in the VC world and from companies in startups that it's not so much one candidate versus the other. It's the uncertainty that was holding up a lot of investment and a lot of investor conversations from the founders that we talked to. So hopefully this means, all right, we've got a decision. We can keep moving forward now.
Yeah, and I think that, there's like we've been talking about a lot lately is you wrap up the year and okay, did the year play out the way we expected? No, not really, because there has been this sort of massive reset, probably the biggest reset ever in VC, going from way too much money in the system to, or essentially a trickle by what some of the numbers we're looking at comparatively, right? Orders of magnitude less money being distributed, and the ship's riding, when it comes to the VC space, right?
Yeah.
And so I think we still felt that this year, that there's
less money in the ecosystem than there has been. PitchBook's report was since 2008 or something in the VC ecosystem, and everybody's waiting for those 10-year returns that haven't come yet. And then you have that longer reset period. And so it's been a little bit slower, at least from our perspective, in sort of getting back to business as usual, even as the economy, big picture economy, public markets seem to be doing well, especially today, by the way, up 4%, I think, the Dow, and 3.5% for the NASDAQ, or 3% for the NASDAQ. It's pretty crazy, but it takes a little bit longer to catch up on those VC markets.
Yeah, and I think, VC's got a bit of a road to come back from that type of reset when you had that much money in the system and things got out a little crazy. And there's also just operators that weren't typically even in the space throwing money into the pool. And it seems like those have retrenched back to their old either private equity ways. And so, I think it's been an interesting year, and we got some certainty after an election. So you see, public markets starting to rip a little bit.
Here's something real interesting. And I feel like I'm allowed to say this because I'm a devout centrist. And, but if you look at Donald Trump, right? Mm-hmm. And you look at his rise, 2016, sort of squeaking by past Hillary Clinton, 2020, obviously losing to Biden, but remaining relevant. And then this election, which appears to be a much larger margin of victory than it was in 2016 for Trump. Something that sort of occurred to me as I'm going through this is love him or not. And seems like people are either one or the other, which is fine. What this brand, what this person, what this politician is, what he is all about, and what sort of problem he's coming to solve. He is a different type of politician, read any newspaper, than anybody's ever seen. I read an article yesterday before the election that says he has destroyed the Republican Party as we know it, and it doesn't exist anymore. And it is a new kind of populist led Republican Party that is vastly different than in 2015. I read a similar article today that said the Democratic Party is no longer what it once was. It has been destroyed by Donald Trump as well. And it started me thinking about this sort of allegory to category design and how something different comes in. And again, maybe it's a bad allegory because there's so much involved in politics, and I'm not commenting on the politics at all, But like, it is interesting that a different thing comes in and creates a different era. People understand what this thing is, what problem it purports to solve, and can embrace it or reject it. And then it changes the markets that are around it as well. So the idea of a different candidate sort of succeeding in some ways makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, and there's a lot of parallels to, the principles that we operate by, right? And absolutely, I also think that there's clearly a massive unsolved problem. It's, people are pretty fed up with the problem that's persisted, and that there was also almost like there was overdue for like something different, right? Whether that different turns out to be good or bad, I think different it's one of those things where it's like, man, it's a lot of people want and are looking for something different.
And the problem that he solved or tried to solve or tried to convince people he would solve, depending on your point of view, this is last rally, Trump's last rally. He says, are you better off now than you were in 2016? Like, that's what he's coming in to solve. That is not a confusing problem. That is a straightforward problem. That I was better off in 2016. Most people were. So can I, from a financial standpoint, I should say, can I, get that back? If I can, maybe that's a solution I want to embrace. And I feel like a lot of people did. And that's pretty classic in terms of category design.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, a very clear problem, and speaking to and understanding how do you get people to feel something in order to move to your point of view.
Yeah.
Right. And ultimately speaking to, identifying and helping exposing that problem in a way that makes them feel it emotionally, which is like, I'm not better off.
Yeah.
Despite all of the headlines that say our economy is amazing, unemployment's never been lower than it is today, there's something off, right? There's something.
Yeah.
People aren't seeing it, whether that's also like, there's been theories of like, oh, well, it's also perception, and we live in an Instagram world where everyone sees other people doing better and therefore they see themselves as doing worse. But there's also truth to distribution of benefit from from this type of economy as well. So yeah, it's an interesting time to be here in America, here in the world.
Yeah, it sure is.
And also like trying to make sense of it all, and also help the founders and companies that we work with, and work through this reset in their own in the way the money flows into the companies and into this model of VC backed companies. We work with a lot of public ones too, and I think everyone's starting to feel like, all right, there's a big wave of change happening. Either I'm going to be a part of and lead that wave, or I'm going to get crushed by that wave, right?
Yeah.
And we talked a bit about like the AI trough of disillusionment and how substance will come from that, and how that still is a really big transition.
Yeah.
We were just talking a little bit about, venture capital needing a reset, but then when is that, a lot of money on the sidelines, how does that start to come back into, and where does that flow to? And then ultimately, like, there's still a lot of noise. And I think you were sharing some numbers on how many new businesses are formulated every year, like to just talk about noise and the success rate of those aren't always certainly, the odds are stacked against them.
Yeah, 10% succeed.
Yeah, I mean, in VC backed world, it might even be less, right? Technology backed. So going down the path of like, all right, well, what are all the problems that we see come to our doorstep, right? When founders come in and engage with us, and we start to go through a list of what those problems are.
Yeah.
And here, like, in what really they ladder up to a much bigger problem. But it's interesting to talk through sort of what we typically see from people who don't get where I'm going and what I'm doing. I keep on getting put in the wrong box. Like, and I think what we've been talking about for the last couple of weeks is like, how do we unpack some of those and expose one? This might be something that you're feeling as well out there, right? You as a founder, you as an operator of a startup or a new idea, an entrepreneur, probably feeling some of these same pain points.
Yeah.
And
also,
I think that's what will be great to talk about even, today, and and well into the future. We've got quite the laundry list, but it's great to unpack and talk a little bit like, why do those things show up? And then what are ways that we've seen that work really well to overcome these problems?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. So like you were talking about VC funding and more difficult to get funded now, especially like that sort of growth stage. The volume just isn't there and it hasn't rebounded the way that we'd expect. So it seems to me like there's kind of a decision that you can make in a market like this, a VC market like this, which is like, what I see most of the companies doing is sort of playing it safe and saying like, okay, we want to get a piece of this limited amount of resources that we need in order to have runway, in order to grow. So let's play it safe and save on spending and kind of marshal things in a way that we know people will understand. And it starts to be like mimicry of existing categories. And you start to focus on things like TAM, total addressable market within an existing market, because you can say this already exists. We know demand is here. So there's that sort of one hand of, one way of thinking about it, which is to sort of play it safe. And then there's the other side, which is basically, if you play it safe, and you're showing up like everybody else, eventually the market is just going to say you are everybody else and you have nothing different about you. And that's not really appealing to investors or to, anybody who's not in procurement, right? Like you are selling something just like everybody else. Is yours cheaper? Is it faster? Is it better? Okay, next year somebody else's might be. And what are you going to do? And is that really a race to the top or a race to the bottom? So play it safe, or take an opportunity right now to really find that problem nobody else is solving and show up different from all of the competitors, so that for those limited resources that are available, you are showing up in a way that is completely different to solve a completely different problem with a whole bunch of untapped and incremental really potential attached to it. And I think I see a lot of companies going to that sort of left side of playing it safe, but I think that there's a huge opportunity. I think most of the money is going towards the ones that are actually solving real problems and being different than anything else that's out there.
Yeah, and I also think inherently though, by the time we talk with the companies we talk with, the founders we talk with, the leaders at these companies we talk with, I don't know if they're like, hey, I need to find a new problem.
Right.
I think that they've already found a problem. Like they have had this insight about something that hasn't. So are they finding, or are we helping them? Like we've had this discussion. Like, I think if you're like, hey, I want to do a startup, what should I do? Yeah, make sure you become like, what's the problem out there that gives rise to a new market, a new category, something that scale. But most of the time, what we find is that founders have already like had that insight. I've already seen this thing that's missing in the world, and they've clearly seen that missing as a bad thing, right? That thing should be there. It shouldn't be this way. The world should be this other way.
Yeah.
And what I think we end up doing is like, yeah. And what you've really done, founder, CEO, executive, what she's done is like, you've identified it, but you really have identified a problem, and you haven't put it in that framing and context in a way. And by doing that, by going through that exercise, people that you are trying to solve it for, people that suffer from that problem, can actually give you like recognize like, oh, I get what you're doing. Versus we want to jump so quickly like, what do you do? Well, this is what I do. And when you start with like, this is what I do and this is my product and this is, people immediately have a hard time comprehending and understanding, but they also tune out, right? It's just not about me. We're very we're complex creatures, and in some ways we're very simple creatures as humans, right? We operate in the world through our own narrative. And so you need to be able to recognize that and tap into that narrative by making it about them. And the problem is about them. And so that insight, that missing in the world, framing it in a problem that you've identified, framing it as a problem, why it's so powerful, right?
Yeah.
And that's why I think that a lot of all the founders that, the dozens and dozens of category designs that I've had the opportunity to, the companies I've worked for, the leaders I've worked for, things I've built in my lifetime, I saw the problem. I saw them missing the world, and I think they all see it, right? They've connected the dots. Now it's the articulation of it in a way that actually can catch fire, right? That can.
Yeah. So why doesn't that work? Okay. I started a company. Obviously, we've raised a little bit of money. Like we have a problem, like you said, but then what's wrong? Like, why isn't that getting out there then in that situation?
Yeah, because I don't think that people, and I don't think founders in general are like, one, it's not a skill to be like problem led. Problem led is for some reason we get obsessed about the thing that we're going to make. Like we jump 2 steps ahead and we say, this is the thing that's what's most interesting also to the founders. Like this thing I'm going to build, this thing that it's going to do and all these cool things, but they forget a step of like, why does it matter?
They take the problem for granted. Yeah.
Yeah. You take the problem granted because you've already moved on in your own narrative, right? You've already moved, and then you can 2 steps ahead.
I guess too, once you move on too, you can get lost. You can sort of forget where you started too. Like what was the problem originally? Well, we've done a lot of product led, development, innovation, sales, and we've come up with this product, but is it actually solving a novel problem?
Yeah.
One that you had identified in the first place? Maybe not.
Yeah. And I think that it's interesting. I'm starting to work through Mike Maple's book, Pattern Breakers, I think it is. It's really good, but he was the early thought leader with Play Bigger and Al and Chris and the team. And so there's a lot of sort of similarities in thinking and style, but the way he even describes his own investment journey with Twitch, right? Where how he invested in Justin TV.
Right.
And the founders then, Justin, were clearly onto this powerful inflection point of being able to stream your entire life, right?
Anything, yeah.
But nobody really wanted to watch just one individual in their life. It was sort of like an inflection and an insight without a problem to solve.
Yeah.
And only when it became like, wait a sec, gamers really want to watch other gamers play, right?
Yeah.
And they really can't do that unless, at least in a scaled way.
That's interesting. Yeah.
And when it flipped to that, then it became, this massive opportunity.
The problem pivoted.
Yeah. And so, but that was still under the surface percolating. Like that was all these big shifts in, the first ideas don't necessarily dictate the end success. And that's why I think like in these early stages, the quicker, founders can turn in, we get that question a lot, like, when should you start to do category design? And
right.
What we found is like, and we've talked about this, I think before, is it's really doesn't matter what stage you're at. If you can adopt these principles, it's really important. I think earlier on, when you are, say, the Justin.tv, what if you had taken on like the problem mindset, maybe you would have gotten to Twitch a lot faster. Right?
Yeah, but also maybe there is like you've used this term before and I like it, which is problem market fit. And a lot of people are product market fit. Like, does this work for whatever individual and however they decide to use it? But if you think about it, like their problem might have had something to do with people wanting to connect with other people and whatever. But then that wasn't the right problem. So they had to pivot to a problem that actually felt urgent and worth solving for the customer base, which ended up being gamers and focusing on a specific audience, like a specific niche, in order to be able to watch other gamers, which is difficult to do without a platform designed for that. So all of a sudden you have a solution to a problem that people find valuable.
Yeah.
And it's that simple.
And I, again, haven't got too far into the book, but it talks about, movements. How do you build movements? And I think part of even the journey that we start with our companies is, we help frame and identify a problem in a way that like now go own it, validate it, find the market fit for that, or the market that it will create is really what it should be phrased as, right? And in doing so, you actually you need to become the expert on this problem. You know it from an insight right now, but now you're going to go deep on it and to understand it in a deeper way, ultimately that it catches fire and becomes a movement. Sometimes you don't know what you don't know until you get into it. Yeah. And I think that is probably true of the Twitch case, right? It's like until you get into like, oh, this is where the movement is going to happen because these are the people that feel very passionate about the problem as existing. Otherwise, it's just a map, like the ability to stream to anyone all the time, anywhere. It's too amorphous, right? It doesn't have, it can't, how's that going to turn into movement?
Yeah.
Well, gamers are very passionate about gaming.
Yeah.
And the community around that, there's already plenty of massive communities around that, but the idea of actually sharing in the experience despite physical presence, that's pretty massive. But you wouldn't uncover that until you went through the process of saying, well, I think, of the general problem, and then actually getting into the specific movement building problem that shows up.
Yeah.
And I think that's some things that we often see is like, okay, why do we engage with the companies that we work with over a long time span? Because the initial strategy work that we do to set up the point of view and put all that stuff in place is really important. But actually putting that into market and finding that path and uncovering that opportunity and finding those early mass, early to mass adopters that are going to carry you into the full category potential.
Yeah.
That is a whole different animal, and it requires a whole different way of thinking and putting into practice sort of what the strategy work is intended to embody. And that's why it's like the only way that we can ensure the type of affecting the type of outcomes that we want to affect, the type of category creating outcomes that we want to affect, is that we get our company to the starting line, but we also have to run the race with them. We have to join them in this marathon that takes place. And a lot of people think, oh, we did this. We got to, we put it down on paper. We went out and we named and claimed the category. You got to the starting line, essentially, is what you got to.
Yeah.
Now the race is on. And running that race is really important.
Yeah, I agree. And
Right?
Here's probably, so I think there's two things in what you're saying that a lot of people may not see in that sort of category design process. And the first thing is, every category design that we do starts with a category assessment where we try to get people who are working at the company or familiar with the company, sometimes customers, analysts, etc., to tell us things like, what problem do you think this company solves? And the first thing that we do is start to map out what problem the company does solve or could solve. And usually what we end up with is like 7, 8, 9, 10 different problems. Sometimes in one response, we'll get like 4 or 5 problems, right? And we start to map those out, and we could say, look, there are like these 7 problems you could solve, but are any of these really different, really problems that people haven't solved already with a competitor in an existing market, or care enough about to try to solve, or have enough money to solve? And what I mean by that is, this problem might be targeted to a person who might be buying your product right now, but has a very limited budget. What is the problem that their boss has, who might have more money, or their boss or the CEO has, relative to what you're doing? And how do you get those folks to start to say, hey, wait a minute, Jason, this is a problem that we have. What's our plan for solving it? Even if you're the customer, getting that sort of pressure from the top to start to think about things in a different way, that's what the problem can do. And what I wanted to say was, like, that takes a long time. You talked about the amount of strategy work. We spend a lot of time talking about the problem and trying to find the right audience for that problem, and who those super consumers are, and how high up we want to go. If it's a B2B, how high up we want to go in the sort of hierarchy there. And if it's for a customer, which of these customers are going to be most willing to pay for something like this, for instance, in gamers. So I think that's on the one side, people don't see that. And then on the other side, once you've got this thing, okay, we figured out the problem, we figured out the solution, we wrote a blueprint, we wrote a point of view. You read the point of view, Jason, and it makes you cry because it's so powerful and you spend so much time on it, and like nobody cares except for you. So then how do you take this awesome thing and actually, a lot of times, turn the company to start to believe in that, which for a large company is no small feat at all, and then use that momentum to actually get those customers to realize, holy cow, this is a problem that I actually can solve, and I need to do it right now. And that is what you said. That's where the sort of race is won, is in that sort of execution phase, once you figure out that point of view.
Yeah. And I think it's like, that I've been obsessing a little bit. Like I love the elegance of that strategy work, getting to a solution, forcing decisions, and getting to that point of view. I think what I've started to recently obsess with over the last couple of years, like last year or so in particular, is how do you operationalize that? What does it mean? Like, it's great to say these words like, oh, we got to operationalize the point of view, but what does that really mean? And I think that in part, how do you start with like problem led? Okay, that's another nice saying, but what do we mean by that? How do you start to now? How does that manifest? How's the problem manifest for customers, potential customers, prospects? Right, getting like, that's what I'm saying. Like, you have to become the expert on it. So, you see too many times where it's like, okay, I put this problem out into the world, and you're right, there's still crickets. Like, no, there's a lot of work still to do. In many cases, the problem that we identify isn't one that is. It's still something that people don't even know they have, right? Many times they don't even, or they didn't believe could be solved. So now you have to go through the process of, yes, being led with that, but helping them understand the pain that they're feeling, the pain that it often shows up in the process too. The strategy process of a problem is actually just a symptom of a much bigger problem.
The phases. Yeah, no, I totally agree. There are like different phases of sort of understanding. And it's interesting, like when you put that category into the world, phase one is once you have a captive audience and you're in a sales call or whatever, and you start to say, this is the problem right here, and here's what it's costing you. And this is all you have to do to solve it. Let's sign you up right now or whatever. The phase one is those captive audiences are like, holy cow, yeah, let's do it. But it takes a while for that to go to like captive audience to now people are starting to come to you because that problem is something that they start to internalize and see all over the place, not just from you, but in news, in their boards, in advisors, all different kinds of places, in lightning strike activity. And then they start coming to you. And that would be like a different phase too. Now, all of a sudden, everything is inbound. It's not just those captive audiences that are interested. It's these people who are coming to you and saying, hey, we got to solve this problem. And I hear that you know how to do it.
Yeah. And in many of the same stages in product market fit, right? Like, hey, it's instead of a push, there's a pull that starts to happen, right? That the product takes off on its own. I think it's the same with problem, right? It's at first you need to work it until you actually really manifest it personally to the folks who have it, right? Put it in the context of their world.
Yeah.
Put it in the context of their day-to-day lives.
So we've been talking like very theoretically. I want to talk about like, okay, there is this. Have you ever gone to the drugstore and like you need to get like a razor or something and it's locked up, or like the expensive soap or whatever? And like what you do, you like push the button, and then like something says over the loudspeaker that a agent will be with you soon, and then you sit there for a while until you like grab somebody who doesn't know how to open the case, who has to then go get somebody and then by that time you're like, I don't even want to buy this thing. So that's bad for the customer because like you're not going to buy the thing, but it's bad for the retailer too. But like, what's the alternative? All your stuff gets stolen, right? And that costs you too much. So there's like some calculus, whatever. But the experience sucks. Like that is a problem, right? Like that is a huge problem, and it has pain points on two sides. And a really good example of a company I just read about.
Well, isn't that also the thing that's like, I'm just going to order this on Amazon. Like you're just basically pushing customers in the arms. Amazon, like it'll just show up tomorrow. I don't have to worry about this. Like, you're just basically CVS. You're pushing people into the arms of Amazon with that experience. But it's like you're in a conundrum. You're in this sort of like, I have to, I can't sustain the losses from people stealing the stuff. At the same time, I want to improve the friction, the experience for customers to buy.
It's even better when they put like embarrassing products in the case and you have to push the button, and it takes you back to like the pharmacy and the condom guy, and like you had to ask for those things. It's like what we're going back to, but there's economic pressures on it. So here's an example of a problem that nobody thought they could solve. Like, what are you supposed to do? Get your stuff stolen or not? And a company, actually two companies right now, is Walmart and CVS, are using a vendor, which actually like they won't say who it is, but it seems to be this company called IndieMe, And what they've done is they've created a new category, which is called smart cases. And you can go in with your phone and you can enable location services and say, this is where I am, this is what I want. And the case opens, and then you can take what you want. So the case is opened automatically via your phone. You don't have to wait around for the sales associate to then flag down the right sales associate who can open the case for you and give you your embarrassing product so that you can then go buy it, finally, but you've already gone to Amazon at that point. So here's like a very clear problem with a really great solution that is going to be valuable to retailers, because all of a sudden they don't lose millions of dollars in sales every year of people going to Amazon because they're able to actually sell the products without them getting stolen. So when you find the right problem like that, and by the way, IndieMe is a company that's been around since the 80s, and they've had a lot of products, it seems, in like payroll protection and things like that. So this is a company who's able to sort of find a new problem and pivot into something really critical for retailers that could help them, again, compete against these behemoths like Amazon.
Yeah. Make sure that the immediacy of wanting to purchase something now can actually happen without too much pain, right?
And that's like whenever, sometimes we work with companies that are very technical and dealing with very technical buyers, but that almost doesn't matter. The problem needs to be as simple as what I just described. Like, you are solving this problem with a very straightforward solution. The minute it starts getting into jargon and like, well, we do this kind of thing in a different way, you're just asking to be put into these sort of mental pockets that people have in their brains already. You're like one of those things. You need to show up in a very clear, very different way to solve a very different problem if you want to actually break through and not be categorized. And it's funny, we just finished writing a newsletter for November. We send one out every month. If people haven't subscribed, they should. But one of the interesting, so the title of the newsletter is "Why Doesn't Anybody Get Me? Why doesn't anybody understand what I'm doing?" And it's something we hear from founders all the time.
This is one of those pain points that shows up time and time again. Is like in some shape or form, it's like, why doesn't the world get me?
People keep trying to tell me I'm this thing, but that's only one of the things we can do. We're so much bigger than that. But guess what? If you are talking like one of those things and you are using the same kind of language and you're not differentiating on a problem that's different than what that thing does, you are that thing. And the market has put you there and you can't get out.
Yeah, like even that's the other thing. It's like it's easy to concede when someone says, "Oh, you're basically this, then, and this." I'm like, "Oh yeah," but what we preach, teach, push is do not let someone do that to you. If somebody says no, you're like X and you are so much more than say, no, I'm absolutely not that. I'm actually much different.
Yeah.
And like being adamant, I think, about that different, I think is such an important shift in mindset that has to take place with founders, because you're right. You need people, what they know in the world, they want to use that as reference to understand what they don't understand.
You worked on a company called Beekeeper. We talked about in the newsletter a company called Qualtrics. Qualtrics had this problem because everybody's saying, hey, you're SurveyMonkey on steroid. You're basically a survey company, but you do it a little bit different. And actually, a lot of times founders will describe themselves in these ways. But Beekeeper is a company that also had this problem. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, and Beekeeper, again, they're basically frontline tools for frontline workers, right? How do the frontline workers actually?
So maybe like a hotel maid or a truck driver or okay.
Yeah, anyone that basically deskless is what you might call deskless workers, right? They don't have a laptop in front of them, and yet they are being asked to use the same tools and software that desktop workers use in order to communicate with either the headquarters and the desk workers, the knowledge workers, or those in the office. And so there was never any sort of tools that allowed them to do their work that were, digital tools that weren't modernized, the way they communicate, the way they engage.
And so but how did they get characterized before we started working with them?
Yeah, I mean, they were being characterized as essentially, teams for frontline workers. Right?
Yeah, Teams, Slack for
frontline workers, which is in many ways is like, no. I mean, Slack is very much a desktop office worker chat tool. It's also just about communication, right? Where the needs for frontline workers, like, yeah, we need to communicate, but more importantly, we need access to information in ways that, are mobile on the go. Oftentimes I can't use my hands immediately, right? So what are the and also access to processes and ability to understand, okay, how do I do my work, check off my list, without having to wait around for a manager to come around to check the work, right? And then how do I, manage my own employment, paychecks, schedules. Yeah. Like all that stuff is still predominantly done in physical paper.
Like a bulletin board. Yeah. A bulletin board was shocking to me.
Crazy. Or they like hack together user groups, WhatsApp apps, user groups to communicate that. But that is it is a hack, right? It's not, it's very cumbersome still.
There's security questions about it too.
Security, and then, there's a lot of turnover at these jobs. So who should be on the WhatsApp and who shouldn't. Yep. And I think that, but they were being, you're right, classified as like, oh, so it's, it's Slack, it's Teams, it's for, we're like, no, it's frontline success software. It's like, how do you make them successful at their jobs? Communications, of which chatting communications is a component, but processes and information that they need access to in order to do their job is really important as well.
And the problem was
productivity
the problem was the frontline disconnect, right? Isn't that?
Yeah, disconnect with like, hey, they're being handed these hacks of solutions that were really meant for desktop workers.
So literally where the company meets the customer in most cases, there was not a connection that could happen in real time. There were not opportunities for training that could be reflective of the performance or what was happening in real time. Like none of these things existed. And those hacks, like, Slack, on people's phones, like, first of all, not everybody has English as their first language and is able to sort of type into a phone. And, second of all, you're not going to get everything that you need from Slack, which isn't designed to schedule or designed to figure out where your paycheck is. So like the idea of comparing to something that people have a mental model before and trying to like co-opt that is really perilous. If you're trying to create something new, you actually have to come in and say, the problem we solve isn't that we need desktop workers to be able to connect with each other. The problem we solve is that the front line of your customer experience, everybody who sees your company is connected with your company, is disconnected from your company. And that has costs, which you can measure. And so therefore you need a fundamentally new solution. We reject the premise of the old category. This is not Slack. This is not Teams. This is Beekeeper. This is frontline success.
Yeah.
This is what you need if you have frontline workers.
Yeah. You need something different.
Yeah.
And you need something that can connect all those,
I love that.
Desktop workers, the people that manage the business. But it can't be their software. It has to be the, custom built for, or bespoke to how frontline workers operate. And it's also a massive, it's the biggest workforce is frontline workers. There's more frontline workers than there are any other type of workers, right? Knowledge workers are much small. The amount of knowledge workers in the world versus the number of frontline workers is orders of magnitude smaller. Yeah. So the opportunity and the need is pretty relevant, but they've been sort of bypassed in sort of the digital revolution. What's interesting is that they still come up against like a Microsoft trying to sell, because it's such a huge opportunity, trying to sell tools into the front line and repackage what they have as frontline friendly. And because they're such big giants and they have such, a lot of these businesses are both a mix of knowledge workers and frontline workers. They're like, well, how do we compete against that? Well, you paint them as the problem only persisting. You truly cannot solve that disconnect with the tools that actually create the disconnect.
Yeah.
And so,
it's a great point.
Like, right? It's like, it's pretty obvious how you can blow that up, especially when you go head to head in sales. Like a lot of you're essentially saying, well, if you really do want to adopt, the cheaper free versions of Microsoft down to your frontline workers, then you really aren't serious about solving this problem. You're just trying to find a bargain way to put something in place so that you say you did something.
Which means you're assuming the costs of that problem, like that you have to factor that into your accounting.
Exactly.
That's an easy way to
hey, by trying to save on the license extension of Microsoft tools to your frontline workers, you're not recognizing the full math here, which is also costs that come with still not solving the problem.
And also the thing I like about Beekeeper too is it's coming at the right time. A lot of times when we look at the problem, what is happening in the world that makes this the right problem to solve right now? And often it's like, well, all of the technology and all of the science is there so we can actually solve this from a technical standpoint. But there's also often a cultural thing that's sort of starting to swirl around and make sense. And so is this like the era of unreasonable hospitality? It's the book by, it's Will Guidara, who was the 11 Madison Park, architect turning that restaurant around. And how did he do it? And it's through a partnership of these like front lines, the kitchen and the front of house wait staff, and being able to empower unreasonable hospitality means being able to empower frontline workers. And so this is a sort of interesting era. Qualtrics was similar to, like, it was 2015, 2016, like experiences over things. That's all people cared about. That's what was driving economies. And yet nobody knew what experience they were delivering. They couldn't cash in on the experience economy. That had costs. So I feel like there's an analog between what Beekeeper did and what Qualtrics does, and really the best category designers in the world do, which is find the intersection of the technology, the problem, and then the culture.
And also being able to say, hey, that you can't simply just solve this problem with what exists today. You need something fundamentally new and different.
Yeah, exactly. So, hey, Jason, we are this month and next month, speaking of problems, we are working a new sort of product into our rotation, which is called the Problem Workout from Play Bigger. And it's available to early stage companies, like pre-Series A. And basically, it is a jump start on doing all the work that we just described, like trying to find that problem, really analyzing the
articulate that problem.
The different problems you could solve. And then what's the articulation of the actual problem? Who has that problem? It starts with that assessment we talked about, and it gets us all the way to like a consensus agreement on, wait a minute, there is this problem hiding in plain sight in front of us, which is the first step towards architecting a solution, creating a category, and dominating that category, and creating tons of value that didn't exist before. So if that's something that people are interested in, playbigger.com. You can fill out a form and you can apply to do it. We're not accepting everybody. We have limited spots, but if you're interested in it, go ahead and do that.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. I think that's some of the most profound sort of ahas when we work with founders and companies on this stuff happens at that stage. And I think it is such a powerful foundational element that unlocks a lot of other ways forward, right? Of doing all the things we preach, be different. Why are you different? Well, it really comes down to the problem you solve. So yeah, I can't wait to see, who comes in and who we're able to work with, and also see how that takes flight for them.
Yeah, me too. All right, Jason, any closing thoughts?
No, I don't think so.
We covered it.
We covered a lot of ground. There's a lot going on. Exciting times. Yeah.
So if you want to be seen, make sure that you're creating the conditions to be seen.
From what I've read so far, and what I would say, go out and get Mike Maples' new book. It's a great read.
I wrote that down on the top of my list.
Yeah. And then, absolutely. For those in the frontline space, frontline worker, check out Beekeepers, one of our companies. With Chris and the team are amazing what they've done.
Yes.
And what they've built and how they've grown, even despite the headwinds that have happened over the last couple of years in VC-backed companies. They've done brilliant.
They're a great story.
Check them out as well.
Yeah, great story. And check out your local CVS or Walmart and let us know if you were able to open a case with your phone. Apparently they're very limited sort of rollouts, but apparently on the Upper West Side in New York, the CVS near whatever building is the Arconia in Only Murders in the Building, that's the one that has the unlockable case. So
test it out.
Test it out, and until next time, drop us a line, let us know how it works, and we'll talk to you guys all in a month.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.